about BAF, we are a non-profit that aims to grow the next generation of blockchain experts. So we launch workshops, classes to help students learn about blockchain topic, and we host networking and educational meetups like this one. So I'm super excited to see you all there to talk about Alchemy and the Web3 development ecosystem. So feel free to follow us on Twitter so that you don't miss any one of our meetup. And if you be engaged with us, don't hesitate to become a BAF members. You can check it out on our website. I think it's blockchainacceleration.org. Maybe Elan and Omar, do you want to introduce yourself and your role maybe with Alchemy?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I can start. What's up, everyone? My name's Elan. I've been at Alchemy for about 1.5 years now. I previously studied computer science, and I had worked at Facebook and Instagram as a software engineer, and joined Alchemy on the go-to-market team. I now focus on developer experience at Alchemy, so doing a lot of developer advocacy stuff, kind of tutorials, talking to people every day, and generally super excited to come talk about Alchemy. And Omar and I went to college together, actually, so we have a little history.
It's true. Yeah, we did go to college together. Although, fun fact, I didn't know her in college. We didn't meet. I didn't know her super well. I'd seen her around, but I didn't know her until we started working together. So yeah, my name's Omar, as you guys can see. I'm a software engineer here at Alchemy. Been working a little over 1.5 years, mainly on back-end infrastructure things. Yeah, super excited to talk to you guys about Alchemy.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So I'll let Lev take the discussion and ask you some questions.
My name is Lev. I'm a third year at Carnegie Mellon studying computer engineering and computer science. And yeah, I've been in the blockchain space for not too long, around a year at this point, and have been developing on different platforms using Web3. And yeah, just get this talk going. So yeah, I guess as a general broad overview, in a couple of sentences, could you just explain the story behind Alchemy, how it came about, what it does, and why somebody would use it?
Yeah, so a little bit of background for people who don't know. Alchemy is a blockchain developer platform. So we power 70% of the top Ethereum applications in the space. And we basically make it a lot easier for developers to build Web3 applications. So similar to how AWS helps streamline the development process for Web2 applications, we do the same sort of thing for Web3 applications. And happy to talk more about the ins and outs and technical details there that people find interesting. But generally kind of helping people build and making it easier for them to build applications. And Omar actually might have a better insight into how Alchemy actually originated and how like the idea came about, since he was here in the early stages. But we basically actually started out as a hedge fund application, I believe, for crypto. I don't know, Omar, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So as Lon mentioned, I actually interned at Alchemy about 3 years ago. And when I first got here, we were actually transitioning into our blockchain developer platform the way we are today. But before that, as Lon mentioned, we were actually building our own sort of Web3 app, sort of doing analytics for hedge funds and so on. And now we realized the tooling was pretty difficult to use, and there might be, an interesting problem to solve here. As we were developing on the blockchain, we kind of saw, there's some issues with scalability and reliability and consistency. And why has no one solved this? Maybe we should. And so that's where we stepped in, and here we are 3 years later in the space.
Awesome. How did you come to find those? What were those issues with scalability and consistency? And what was that developer experience like before having something like Alchemy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So basically what happened was our founders went out and interviewed hundreds of developers that were building Web3 applications and building in the crypto space. And time again, everyone said that it was such a big headache to use these things called nodes. And for those of you who don't know, nodes are basically your communication endpoint with the blockchain. Any requests that you want to make that modify the blockchain, or if you want to pull data down and read it, so basically all reads and writes have to go through this thing called a node. And it's basically a piece of software that you run that allows you to communicate with the blockchain. So time and time again, developers were, running into all of these engineering issues and spending a bunch of time maintaining this node infrastructure instead of working on your application. So if you think about it, if I'm building the next OpenSea or the next Web3 version of Uber, I really want to focus on building an incredible application and an incredible user experience. And if I have limited engineering resources, I want to pour those resources into my app rather than into my backend infrastructure and maintaining that part of it. So it's sort of like the buy versus build dilemma. And so everyone we talked to in the early stages was like, this is a pain. We don't want to do this. We want to focus on building our applications. Like, how can we outsource this sort of backend part? And that's really where the idea came about. It turns out there's a reason why this is really, really hard to solve. And that has to do with these scalability, reliability, and data inconsistency issues that happen when you run node infrastructure. And we can talk a little bit more about how those manifest concretely. But the challenges of running node infrastructures were really, really hard. We actually operated in beta stealth mode for a couple of years before launching to the public because we really wanted to solve these problems in the right way and make sure it was a really good experience for our users.
Yeah, we can get to the challenges of running node infrastructure soon, but I was hoping to just kind of go off of, so if Alchemy is running nodes, how does Alchemy specifically save development time and money, and why would you choose something like Alchemy over other nodes out there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Half the battle is, I would say less than half the battle actually is just running the nodes. Like Elan mentioned, all reads and writes go to the node, and so you read data from the nodes and you write data to the nodes, and that data comes in a certain format, and you can only ask it certain questions. A question that you might expect to be able to ask it is something like, "How much has Omar ever sent Elan?" For example, that's a question that might be obvious that someone might want to ask, whether that be in Ethereum or Sushi or Uni or any other ERC20, ERC721, or ERC115 token. That's actually not natively available on the node. You have to sort of query and stitch together a bunch of different queries, logs, be it ETH get block by number or by hash. You have to build a lot of, you have to make a lot of queries to the node, and that information isn't easily digestible. So we've built a suite of enhanced APIs, one of which is the transfers API, but there are tons of other examples that sort of abstract away those primitives and allow users to really leverage APIs in a way that they get access to the information that they need quickly, and it's more easily accessible. A couple other examples are our token balances API. We're also working on an NFT API, which a couple people are using in beta right now. And there are tons of other examples of enhanced APIs that we're constantly working on. Aside from that, we also offer sort of features that the nodes don't natively offer, such as webhooks. So webhook notifications are the way, when you look at your phone and you're on Twitter and you get that little push notification, typically those are powered by something called webhooks. You can just think of it as notifications. And we've also built those on top of the blockchain. So notifications on when your transactions are mined, when they're dropped, when there's certain activity on a given address, and we're constantly looking to build new webhooks for certain developer use cases. We're building one for NFTs right now, and like I said, we're constantly looking to build new and enhanced features on top of the nodes. So it's a little more than just the nodes. On top of that, we also have sort of a suite of tools for monitoring and debugging. So half the battle is reading and writing to the node. And then the other half of the battle is figuring out, why did what I read from the node not work, and why did what I write to the node not work? And so we have a sort of dashboard where you can kind of dynamically interact with your queries and figure out what are the errors that are coming through, what could I have done differently, and why might things be going wrong? And that's anyone who's a developer knows that debugging is more than half the battle. So those are some examples of the things that we offer. Elan might have a little bit more to say there.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would add here is a lot about these things that we've built on top of our node infrastructure, these sort of enhanced APIs. And he's being humble. He actually built out one of the most highly demanded and highly used API. This is frick when he came to Alchemy, was building out this awesome transaction history API. So definitely check that out. But one of the challenges that you actually asked about, Lev, was why not? What's the difference between our node infrastructure and any other node infrastructure, right? So we built out all these awesome. That's great. There's also other really, really interesting and complex problems that we solved with our node infrastructure that nobody else has really solved. And so to talk about one specifically, there's this idea of data consistency and maintaining state when it comes to node infrastructure. Because blockchain is sort of a distributed system, any given point in time, two nodes might not be aware of the same state of the blockchain. So maybe I hear about a block before another node hears about a block, and that can introduce really, really hard and complex problems for the user, right? Because if they're sending a request to your application and it gets routed to one node that knows about the block, and then another request comes through and it gets routed to another node that doesn't know about the block, you're serving inconsistent data. So there's this data inconsistency issue that's like really common and really hard to solve for in blockchain systems. And we've built out the level of infrastructure that allows, that sort of like diminishes that risk, and uses this like consensus mechanism on top of the nodes that allows you to get consistent data. And so that's like really like what went into those like 1 to 2 years of like putting our heads down and putting in the engineering time to actually build out this system that really works.
And yeah, from a distributed systems point of view alone, that's a lot to get the consistency right. That's incredible. And also just in terms of debugging, yeah, it definitely has been a lot of hair pulling with debugging Web3 stuff. So I'm incredibly happy to see some like focus on that. I guess along those lines, if you are a developer and looking to integrate these things, you just start right off the bat. How hard is it? How easy is it? And where kind of does that fit into the development timeline?
Yeah, great question. So it's super easy to start using Alchemy. You literally just create an account and then you spin up an API endpoint actually in that account creation flow. And this endpoint gives you access to our supernode infrastructure, which is basically this infrastructure that Omar and I have been talking about this whole time. So everything we mentioned before, you get access to on like the free tier Alchemy account. And we have a pretty robust free tier. So for sort of developers who are just kind of learning or maybe just testing out their application and maybe they haven't launched yet, the free tier should have you more than covered to be able to get started and play around with stuff.
And then on top of that, we have some really, really great docs. Elan's also being humble. Her first couple of months here, she built out the docs and built out some tutorials for people to easily get started developing with Web3. So it kind of walks you through everything from signing up on our platform to deploying your first smart contract, interacting with that smart contract, and so on. So would definitely highly recommend checking out those docs.
Yeah, good documentation is so important and so often lacking within, especially because so many new projects are new and people are just building so fast. So yeah, it looks like you guys are doing a lot of incredible stuff. So from the infrastructure point of view, what are the challenges you run into? How are you handling all this consistency? And like, how does the team work without kind of bugging out with every Ethereum update or new feature added?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that kind of goes towards the question of whether you should run your own infrastructure or use someone else for infrastructure. And I think we're starting to see the cognitive load of running multi-chain specifically, so running multiple nodes, not just Ethereum, but we offer support for Polygon, Matic, Optimism, Arbitrum, Flow, Crypto.org. And so that becomes an O of N problem, right? As you constantly add new chains, it's the same thing for every single chain. It's track of those upgrades, making sure that your nodes are up to date, that they don't have certain complexities that go on with just managing the node infrastructure that yourself is a little bit cumbersome. And then on top of it, the space is so dynamic in the sense that people are constantly building or upgrades to these node clients. Those upgrades can sometimes be buggy, and so on. And so it's a constant sort of battle to sort of wrangle these nodes and make sure that they're up and running. And so that's sort of one of the trade-offs of building your own infrastructure versus having someone else manage it for you. And so in terms of what we've done, a lot of on the infrastructure side is relying on a lot of best practices for infrastructure as code to sort of make it as easy as possible for us to roll out those upgrades and make sure that our nodes are tested from end to end. We have a lot of sort of infrastructure around integration testing, reliability testing, scalability testing, load testing, and so on, so that when we do deploy these changes, we make sure that there's minimal impact on our users. And if there ever is a breaking change, which sometimes there is, we definitely notify our users like, hey, this client has decided that they're going to be adding these new fields, for example, with certain EIPs coming out, like EIP 1559. So, you might want to start using this to send transactions and so on. And so, if as a user of Alchemy, we're constantly alerting you to these possible breaking changes or upgrades that are being made so that you can make the minimum changes necessary to your application to make sure things are up and running while we take care of the sort of nitty-gritty details of all of the different upgrades.
Awesome. And you guys running your own servers? AWS Nation of both?
Yeah, that's a good question. At the moment, we're relying on a cloud provider, but yeah, that's something that we that we're working towards in terms of going multi-cloud, going in a more sort of distributed nature, and that's definitely on our roadmap so that we aren't pinned to one particular provider, and something that we're exploring internally as well.
Sure. So just a quick recap. You guys are basically building out this whole infrastructure on the back end, so just the orchestration of all the systems, so that it just is easier, like one line for the developer from the front end to get all these amazing features.
Yeah, exactly. So there's actually a bunch of different layers that go into the infrastructure. So Omar knows the terminology better than I do. There's basically a bunch of different types of data stores that we use to different types of data. So like archive gets routed differently than maybe the more recent requests, and vice versa. And webhooks is in a different place than other things as well. So yeah, there's basically this entire high level infrastructure. I think there's like a diagram on our website that you can check out that kind of walks you through what that infrastructure looks like. And but it, for the user, it's abstracted away to this one API endpoint, and you don't really have to think about any of the routing or any of that stuff.
Sure. So I was kind of wondering where Alchemy sees itself going in the future. Like, how does it decide on features to add, what new chains, and the decision process around all that is like?
Yeah, for sure. So Alchemy actually, we really pride ourselves on keeping a super tight customer feedback loop. For those of you guys who aren't in our Discord, definitely hop in there. But we really, really value having human-to-human conversations with all of our users and making sure that we hear and implement your feedback. So pretty much like our roadmap is defined by user feedback and what we hear from developers about what they want. And so that's a big driver for how we decide what to build next, is that we like keep this close tab on the people who are using the platform and the people building in the space. In terms of different chains to support, there's a couple of evaluating factors that we think about when considering supporting a new chain ecosystem. I think number one, first and foremost, is like, are developers excited about that ecosystem and are they moving towards there? We want to go where developers need us most, as opposed to any other factors. So if developers are really, really excited about that ecosystem and are migrating there, then that kind of like puts us in the spotlight, and we consider building out in those sorts of ecosystems. And then there's also some evaluation that we do on our end about the chain itself, and some of the values that that chain has. Do we see it having long-term potential, or is it just kind of like a blip and an excitement right now? So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into that, but generally, like, the way we decide new stuff is really through our users and through our customers and what they care about.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that point as well. I don't build a new feature without talking to at least 10 customers to hone out what does the API look like, what do they want, what are some of the features that they're excited about, and then if you guys want to get involved, like Elan said, feel free to reach out on Discord if there's a feature that you're particularly excited about that you want to see us build, and or Twitter. We also have a public-facing roadmap where we have examples of things that people have requested, and you can go ahead and upvote them and or suggest your own features that you'd like to see. And so we really do prioritize based on how many upvotes or how many people show interest in a particular. So one of the biggest features we have interest in right now is our NFT API, which we're hard at work on.
Awesome, incredible. Is the roadmap for Alchemy determined more by feature requests, or is there some grander or is there some other point that you guys are aiming towards? What's the future look like?
Yeah, so I think that we have general missions and principles when it comes to like deciding what we should focus on as a team and as a company. Um, Most of the applications and things that are going to go mainstream in Web3 really haven't been built yet. So there's so much potential to like think through this foundational layer. And we're in a really, really lucky place where our product is sort of horizontal. No matter which vertical is really, really popular in crypto or Web3, we're seeing developers building, and there's always new tools and resources that they need when building those applications. Um, so I think, as a company, our mission is really to make crypto, blockchain, Web3 mainstream. We really think this is a powerful technology, and we'd love to see like everyone in the world like using these products. The way we see that happening is by empowering developers and enabling them to build applications. Because if you think about it, if there aren't products that users want to use, right? If there aren't attractive products that my grandmother actually really wants to use, then it's not going to go mainstream. But how do you actually build out those products? We have to make it really easy for developers to build them, right? So we're kind of solving this root cause problem of if we want to make blockchain mainstream, we have to enable developers to build really easily. And that's kind of our starting point. So there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot that goes into it. I think what developers care about is really like where we're driven to most, and that can often change. So I don't know if that gives you a good answer of it's not just kind of customer feedback, it's also this like broader initiative that we're trying to accomplish.
Right. No, that's fantastic. I mean, Web3 is never going to go anywhere. Like, actually having it be usable and decent product is such an important focus that definitely be like ideal or placed at the forefront of development. And so I guess along those lines, if you are a developer, how long does it take to like use Alchemy? Uh, and kind of what is the how much time would you say is saved from using something like Alchemy versus a more strict like a simpler node service, or trying to use all the different servers there in conjunction, like say you want to get data from the graph and then you use like in theory and push notification services for pushing. So like what's the time difference there? What's the difference look like? How does that fit in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like Elan mentioned, it's really as simple as signing up. Just go on the website, you can do it with your Google auth and or just sign up for an account, and you're given that URL right away. And that's pretty much plug and play with any sort of Web3 library out there, whether you're using Ethers or Web3 or Web3 Pi or any of the other existing libraries. We also have our own library built out called Alchemy Web3, which allows you to more easily, out of the box, use some of our enhanced APIs, like the transfers APIs we were talking about, as well as other sort of enhanced features around WebSockets and so on, and durability and reliability around those things. But really, it is as simple as a couple lines of code, depending on exactly what you're trying to build out, and getting integrated with these libraries. And yeah, the documentation and shows that some of these docs are crazy. Elan's been able to get it down to like, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes to build a DApp. I was Albert's on the line here, and he was. I think someone reached out to him and they wanted to do a speed contest to see how quickly he could deploy a smart contract. And with our docs, I think he was able to do it pretty quickly.
Awesome. And so running all this stuff and abstracting it away from developers takes a lot of engineering effort. And I guess along those lines, I was wondering if decentralizing the backend is something that you guys have thought about. If so, how and why? If not, why not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess taking a step back, when we were initially coming up with the idea of Alchemy and what we were going to solve, in those interviews where we asked developers like, what's hard for you? What kind of problems can we solve? And then what do you care about? We asked hundreds of people about this, and really what applications cared about most was that their infrastructure was reliable, scalable, and data consistent. And we asked them, we're like, what about decentralized? Like, would you want your backend infrastructure to be decentralized, or is that an important lever for you? They're like, we care more about these things and having our app actually function and work than having it be decentralized immediately. And I think in this space, like decentralization is always the long-term goal. And I don't think we're like ignorant of that. So I think it's definitely something that we'll consider down the line. But right now, really what people care about, really what got OpenSea to be able to scale as much as it did, and some of these other applications that use us are those other factors. And they care less about that decentralization metric than other things. The other thing I'll say about this is that it's actually interesting. I recently heard this argument, and this was actually from one of our users, and we're talking about it. He was like, yeah, like I wanted to come use you guys because I wanted my app to be more decentralized. And I was like, oh, like, what do you mean by that? He was like, well, if I'm controlling my entire stack, right? I built my front end, I wrote my smart contract, and if I'm running my own node, that means that the entire stack of my app is centralized. Whereas if I use you guys to outsource my node, then I'm using this agnostic provider and my application stack becomes more decentralized. So it's this sort of like meta outlook that I actually really haven't thought about before, but interesting take of like decentralization is a very subjective, it's a very subjective concept. So it really like depends on the user and it depends on what you care about. But yeah, I think that's a super good question.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm right there with you guys. It doesn't make sense to decentralize everything if the product itself is not going to be decently usable, or if it's insanely difficult to build as well. So if you are a Web3 developer, just more in general, I know you guys said you got started a couple of years ago building a dashboard to venture capital, and you found the whole Web3 experience difficult. So it's still a little overwhelming. There's a lot going on. How would you recommend getting started? Where would you look? What would you do?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I felt the same way. Like I said, I studied computer science all 4 years of college and did software engineering. And then I got to like Web3 development and I was like, what the hell? I was like, what is going on? Does it make any sense? Like, there's no good resources out there. And it just felt really overwhelming and challenging. So, you know, I would definitely plug our documentation here. We have a bunch of tutorials on there. Keep that in mind. So we really designed all of our content and all of our tutorials with the Web2 developer, even the like no coder in mind, to help them get up to speed and understand a lot of this stuff. So I would recommend like the best way to learn, of course, is by like actually getting your hands dirty and building something. And our tutorials will walk you through like not only what, but also how and why. So why does this important? What does this mean? How does it work? And really break down all of those steps. And so I definitely recommend it. We have tons of people who have never even coded before in their lives, and they come and do our tutorials and like ship their first smart contract or make their first NFT, and are super, super stoked about it. So would recommend getting your hands dirty if you're interested in building in this space.
And then on top of that, you know, if you don't quite want to make the step towards, you know, building right away, and just want to get your feet wet, I would definitely start by just playing with existing products out there to get a sense of what can I build, like what is possible for me to build in the Web3 space, and then you can play around with the decentralized exchanges and the NFT platforms and the all the other cool products that exist out there. Honestly, if you just go to our website and look at our customer list, some of the customers that we showcase and just play around with those products, you'll start to get a sense, what are some of the things I can build? Maybe where are some of the holes or things that are left to be built, and that might give some inspiration before you start building.
So how would you guys say your experiences from Web2 companies like Facebook transitioned into the Web3 space, just in terms of best practices, documentation, and like, for example, React has amazing documentation. That's something by Facebook.
Yeah, sorry. Wait, can you clarify your question around documentation?
Sorry, not just documentation in general, but I was asking like, how does your experience in the Web2 world transition to the Web3 world, where it's still a lot more like Wild West, but there's in the Web2 world, there's a lot of like best practices for engineering.
Yeah.
A lot more based on clean code.
Totally. Yeah. That's actually a really, really good question. So I think there's a bunch to talk about here. I think one of the coolest things that I quickly picked up on in the Web3 space is that it's such like a we mentality. It's such like a, oh, you're new, great, let me help you. Or like, great, let me sit and explain this to you and answer these questions. And so like, even though there's like not a ton of good resources, the people who are in this space are so excited about it and so excited about sharing it with that they're willing to take the time to like teach it to you and talk about it and do these educational stuff and make it easier. So it's really just like this, like everyone here is just like so excited about like the space and so excited about talking to people about it. And I don't think like certain Web2 companies might feel a little bit more jaded. Talk to an employee at a Web2 company, like they're not like thinking about it 24/7 and talking on the weekends and telling all their friends. Whereas like in Web3, it feels like it's very community oriented and everyone kind of helping each other. Omar can speak probably a little bit more about the engineering wise.
Yeah, so in terms of engineering, I would say a lot is the same and a lot is different. So some of the things that are the same, in traditional Web 2, we have this idea of a staging environment and a production environment. And that also exists in Web 3. So there's this thing called test nets, which you can basically think of as staging, which allow you to sort of deploy your smart contract, play around, make sure you debug, get all the bugs out of your contract before you go and deploy it on mainnet. There are also, best practices around deployment and management of code. There are best practices around, retry logic and caching and all these different things that, transition from the Web 2 sort of traditional engineering world into the Web 3 world. Some things that might change depending on the things that you build could be the way that you think about code, in the sense that, if something in your database gets corrupted, you might be able to, in a traditional Web 2 world, just go in and modify it and say, oh no, this shouldn't have been like that. I'll go and change that. In Web 3, it's not so easy to do that. It's a little bit more immutable. And so you have to build around that mentality and make sure that that's really safeguarded. As you guys, I'm sure you guys are all aware, there are these, products that are securing large amounts of value and asset. And so you kind of have to code with a little bit more of defensive mentality and make sure that your, modules are more well scoped and have limited sort of range of impact. That's probably what I would say in general. There's also some things around sort of the distributed nature of the Web3 ecosystem and the way that plays into, consume data and so on. But for most users, it's not as big of a headache. Again, depends on how in depth you want.
Sure. And a slightly selfish question: do you guys have any advice on debugging in the Web3 world?
Yeah, totally. So in terms of debugging in the Web3 world, I think one of the biggest things that's tricky for some library, that certain Web3 libraries don't show the actual error message that's going on under the hood, right? So if you're using like Web3 dot whatever and you call a certain method on an ABI smart contract or something, you might your Sentry error might be like couldn't process this JSON object or whatever other, and you might not know where to start. And so the nice thing about our platform is we show you what call was actually made under the hood and how that might have actually failed. So it might be like execution reverted or not enough gas. And so error messages are really helpful here when it comes to debugging what might actually be wrong. And we kind of in our UI we show you all of the requests you've made, and you can filter by the requests that have errored and kind of get a better sense of why things might be erroring. Same thing goes for that's sort of for reads. When it comes to writes, we also have a mempool dashboard where you can see your transactions. You can see if they're mined, dropped, or pending. If they're pending, you can look at things like nonce and gas and kind of compare those and make sure things are running smoothly. So we try to provide as much tooling around getting to the root cause of what might be going wrong. Another thing is sort of just as best practices, retries, exponential backoffs, things like that can definitely go a long way in the Web3 world.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw a use case on your guys' website where it's taking the debugging time down from like a couple days to a couple hours. Or I think it's a couple minutes. That's incredible. And then following that, what advice would you have for developers in general entering Web3 space? There's a lot going on, a lot of really cool things happening. But in terms of advice for building, advice for keeping some focus, and general tidbits you guys might have.
Yeah, I would say so I think one, like obviously just getting your hands dirty and like playing around with stuff. Two, I think the space is really quickly and there's a lot going on. but it's really, really important to remember that it's still so early, and most of the products and projects that are out there are going to evolve and aren't quite ready for mainstream audiences yet. So it wouldn't feel like, I know a lot of people come and they're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm so late. Like it's like everyone's talking about crypto, or like, I don't know, it's too late to build. It's like still so, so early. Like we are just a sliver of the beginning. So really like anything is possible. There's so many things that should and will be built. And so if you have an idea, even if it's already been done before, like definitely go for it and like build out a better experience. Yeah, I would say like don't like, it's good to keep up with the space and like see what's going on, but like you should get your hands dirty. If you have an idea that you're really passionate about, like start building it.
Yeah, and on top of that, as Juan mentioned, the space is so big, and people are doing things. The thing I would probably emphasize is finding a community. There are so many Web3 communities out there. Find one on our Discord. There are tons of people who are constantly active there from all over the world, who are constantly building, giving each other advice and support. And so finding those communities can be really helpful for developers to sort of have people to ask questions to and then share excitement with and enthusiasm with. So I would say, plug into a couple of Discords and really find those communities that you're excited about and passionate about working with. Whether it be an NFT project or a decentralized exchange or maybe even a node client. Just pushing the space forward in general. There are so many different Discords that I'm in, and it's cool to see people constantly active in them. And participating and constantly pushing the ecosystem forward. There's always like I can't tell you how many channels I'm in that have a hashtag beginners section or something like that. So just find that one, go in there, and there is no such thing as a dumb question, and just start learning.
Awesome. Yeah, I found the space to be incredibly welcoming, and the communities in Discord are incredible. And then finally, I was just wondering if you guys go over any hiring opportunities or any opportunities at Alchemy that might be coming up.
Yeah, of course. We're always hiring across the board. I'll speak to engineering, and then maybe Elan can speak to some of the go-to-market positions we have. But for engineering, we're hiring across the board. That's front end, back end, full stack. We have slightly more roles for back end. So we have things for multi-region infrastructure, data engineering, sort of all of the back end things you could think of. We probably have a position for you, DevOps, SRE. All those JDs are out and available at our website. I'll tell it to you as soon as I find it. I think it's jobs.alchemy.com or something. But I'll double check while Elan gives the other positions we have.
Yeah, I mean, same as, similar to engineering, on the go-to-market side, we're hiring all across the board. Marketing team, sales team, customer support team, all of the above. Yeah, definitely like no shortage of job opportunities here.
Awesome. So you guys give us opening it up to the floor for questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do it.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, just speak up.
I had a question. What is Alchemy's relationship with like Ethereum Foundation, especially since you have like a product like Alchemy Monitor, right? You're seeing a lot, and you know, is there like any input you like Alchemy gives to Ethereum when it comes to like EIPs or something?
Yeah, that's a super good question. Yeah, so we, generally work with the Ethereum Foundation on like kind of major upgrades and changes. So things like EIP 1559. They looped us in on all of the updates there to make sure we were like kept up to date. We definitely like bubble up feedback that we get from users to the Ethereum Foundation as well. So people who have feedback about Ethereum, about building in the space, we share that with them. We also kind of just like contribute to their website and put tutorials on there for other people to learn who are going straight to there, write content for them. But yeah, I mean, just kind of work with them in the ways that we need to collaborate on.
Yeah, and to that end, I think we literally just this week sent out Typeform for a proposal that they have around archive data to some of our customers. So we're constantly getting feedback from our customers and relaying that to not just the Ethereum Foundation, but a bunch of the people in the space that we work with. So the developers of Geth and Aragon and all the other clients. And the developers at crypto.org who are building those chains. We're constantly relaying that feedback from our customers so that we can not only improve our infrastructure, but the actual underlying nodes themselves, and make sure that those are running smoothly for our clients.
Oh, okay. I guess I had another question. So you guys were talking about like supporting like multi-chains and like listening to customers on which ones to support. But like normally, what is like the timeline and how much work does it take to support other like EVM sidechain / layer twos?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So I think that a lot of people assume like, oh, like why can't you just support it right away and like spin up these nodes? So we talked a little bit more. I don't know how long you've been on the call, Kunal, but we talked a little bit before about how we built out this kind of higher level infrastructure to solve for scalability and reliability and data consistency. Actually building new nodes and plugging them into that system, just like snap of a fingers, we like plug it in. There's a lot of like work that goes around to make sure that it's abiding by those standards that we have for our users, and we take that super seriously. So it's not like serious, but it's definitely not like super trivial. I think Omar can talk a little bit more about what on the end side, what that takes to implement. But
yeah, on the end side, it's definitely something that we're working on. Our objectives are to be able to spin up new chains as quickly as possible. We're putting in as much infrastructure so that we can just plug and play and plug in those nodes into our infrastructure. Some of the things that makes that difficult, however, as Elan was alluding to, is that one, sync time. So nodes take a long time to sync from scratch, and so when we're deciding to support a new node, sometimes it can take on the order of multiple weeks just to sync the node before we can even start playing with them. And there are certain clients that have fast versions that allow you to only see a certain portion of the blockchain, but as we mentioned, our developer suite gives you access to archival data for free. So we're constantly looking for supporting chains to the fullest extent possible. So we're looking for that archival data, and so that's one thing. Once we get that node up and running, it takes due diligence to sort of test that node. So we have to push the node to its limits and figure out how many of this calls can it handle? How many of these calls can it handle? And that gives us a sense of how much do we need to provision so that we can have fancy algorithms around auto scaling and provisioning more infrastructure given the load that we have on those nodes. And then on top of that, we mentioned that we're a super node. We're more than just nodes. So as a team, we're working on reducing the amount of time it takes to spin up a new chain, i.e. just spinning up those nodes, running those nodes, and then giving customers access to those nodes. But as we mentioned, we're more than just that. And so there are certain queries that might not be as optimal to make on the node that we build secondary infrastructure on top of. And so that part of it takes time. It takes time to figure out, what are the use cases that customers have that we might want to index on and provide secondary infrastructure on top of? What are the queries that are slow and non-performant on these nodes that we might want to build secondary infrastructure on top of? And so that's just a bunch of profiling and benchmarking. That's the bulk of the work. Spinning up the node is we have some great DevOps SRE peeps who have made that lightning fast. But the due diligence around supporting all the other parts of our infrastructure is what takes time.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think of it that way. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, if anybody else questions, I'd like to ask one as well. So you guys, service developers, you guys see any development trends within Web3?
yeah, I think we're in a fortunate position where people are coming to us at all stages of the building process. I think throughout the NFTs were just like the hot thing to build. Everybody was building an NFT project, and we were hearing a lot of that in our Discord. I think now a lot of people are getting into DAOs. I think NFTs hasn't died down. Just to clarify, that's still like a very, very popular thing to build. But DAOs have become increasingly interesting for developers to build. Yeah, so that's kind of like one popular thing. But honestly, like if you just hung out in our Discord and like were there, you would see like what people are interested in. You can just kind of like pick up on trends there.
And then on top of that, just like a general trend that we're seeing is that a lot of people are getting into the space, regardless of what we're building. Our numbers are sort of up and to the right when it comes to teams that are building on top of us, queries that are coming through us, chain, and that's across the board with all different chains. So people are really, really excited and building, and that's a general trend that we're seeing.
Awesome. Slightly more technical. Are you guys load balancing when you're keeping consistency for a node? Are you keeping consistency across multiple nodes, or just scaling up, or having one node handle more requests?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at the crux of consistency, and what makes Web3 a little bit more difficult, or running nodes a little bit more difficult, is that load balancers don't quite cut it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with load balancers are essentially this networking layer that sits on top of servers. And as we mentioned, nodes are distributed servers, and those servers can have a different view of the world. So these servers are constantly getting updated information about the blockchain. They're verifying that information, and they're writing it to disk. And then they're saying, okay, I know this is the information in my disk, so I'll share that with whoever's calling me. And so you might have two nodes, one of which is fully synced at the head of the chain, and let's say that chain is at block 100, and then another node that's falling behind. It's struggling, maybe it's having networking issues or something or other, and that's at block 10. They're literally 90 blocks apart. And in a traditional world, you can throw a load balancer on top of usually stateless servers, and you're fine. But in the blockchain, these servers are very much stateful. And so if you just threw a load balancer on top of it, you might run into inconsistency issues. For example, if you ask, what is the latest block number? And you go to the load balancer, one of them is going to tell you 100, and one of them is going to tell you 10. And so you can clearly see that there's going to be some inconsistency there. And so we've built out algorithms on top of that to sort of make sure that we have nodes that are quickly syncing as quickly as possible. B, make sure that we have enough nodes to support enough traffic before we publicize the next block. And so our internal philosophy here as sort of engineering, we want to present a super node. We want to present one view of the world, one node. And so if we say we have 100, we have 100, and we're ready to serve 100 to you at whatever cost, right? And we won't go back on that. And as soon as we say we have 101, we have block 101, and we're ready to serve that for you. And so there's some trickiness that goes around that consistency. It's not quite as simple as slapping a load balancer on top of it. It's making sure that a certain percentage of nodes know about that node, making sure that secondary infrastructure has all the caches in place necessary, ready to serve that traffic. It's making sure that all the pub subsystems are aware of that new state change that took place. It's making sure that reorganizations are handled properly. Reorgs are a tricky sort of thing in the blockchain. Kind of allows state to be modified from the past when a newer long is found. And so that's all of that is trickiness that we handle on our end so that you don't have to deal with it as an end user.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? All right, I might have to ask one more. So does that mean if you have an update to the blockchain which does not get routed through an Alchemy node, that would take longer to see because you have to get some consistency within the Alchemy nodes?
Do you mind repeating the question? You're saying if you make a request to an Alchemy node and then or an Alchemy endpoint and then make a request to your own node, what could happen? Or
no, like if you're like pulling data from the blockchain and the blockchain state or somebody pushes data to the blockchain, not through an Alchemy node, but through some other node, would it take longer to see it if you are using an Alchemy node?
Talking about propagations of transactions, like writes to the chain.
Like just delays, like if there has to be some sort of consistency guarantee from like, is there any delay added by the consistency guarantee from the?
The trade-off between latency of block discovery and consistency. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, that's definitely a trade-off we're cognizant of, and there are certain parameters that we're constantly looking at tuning, and ways in which we change our algorithm to make sure that we are making the biggest trade-offs. It's a battle for sure, right? Like what we could do is say, as soon as one node knows about it, we're going to publish it to the rest of the world, right? But we're serving so many queries that that can't work. There's no possible way that as soon as one node knows about it, we're going to let everyone hammer that one node. So it's a trade-off for sure. But certainly working on building new, viewing the world in a different way and making sure our algorithms are set in such a way. In fact, today we just released a new version of our sort of layered algorithm on top of our nodes that reduced block discovery latency by an order of magnitude. I think we'll be sharing that later.
The other thing I'll just add here is, I mean, Omar's completely right. I think this is something that like we're continuing to improve and work on all the time. But like at the end of the day, like if you're like a trader and you want the absolute latest block that any node knows about, we're not the right use case for you. Like we're designing our product for like companies and projects that want to like scale and actually be widely used by users. We're not really designing for like arbitrage opportunities and trading as much. And so like, people will come, they're like, hey, like, like I'm not seeing it as fast as I want to, like I'm not getting the like latest block, whatever it is. Like I'm like, okay, what's your use case? And understand that a little bit more and then point them in the right direction. So I think it's obviously like latency is something you want to constantly improve, but depending on your use case, like Alchemy just might not be the right fit for you.
That said, however, by nature of us running multiple nodes in multiple different regions, those nodes are constantly gossiping amongst each other, and those nodes are also constantly gossiping amongst other nodes in the network. And so, by virtue of the distributed nature and the way we've set up our peering, it's likely that we will discover those blocks and those transactions more quickly than you would if you just ran one node, for example, on your own. And so there's some trade-offs to be made there and to be considered. By virtue of having 10 nodes all over the world, you're more likely to discover things than if you just had one node, say in I don't know, in California, right? There's that round trip time latency that you have to think about. There's all these different factors that go into the distributed nature of the system.
Awesome. And for anybody interested in the algorithm side of things or the more CF side of things, are there white papers or anywhere, is it a place that can be found?
In terms of so if you're curious about sort of the algorithms used for Ethereum, the Ethereum white paper is great. That gives you a sense of how the protocol works in general. It's relatively short. I think it's on the order of 14 pages. I read it. It was really helpful in understanding the way the protocol works. In general, there are also some great books around distributed systems and some of the race conditions around that you might find interesting. In terms of some of the things that we use internally, I don't think we've shared those. We have a high level of what we do, but I don't think we've shared any of those. But yeah, in terms of the actual protocols themselves, would highly recommend looking at the Ethereum white paper to get a sense of how consensus works and so on.
Awesome. Any other questions from the audience? Incredible. Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out and having this talk. Alchemy is an awesome platform. I highly recommend checking it out. And yeah, thank you again.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks, Lev.